I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
We really tried to introduce this notion of social value into the risk profile because, we're not just investors, right? We also really prioritize social impact. When we think about high risk, high return, we're also thinking about the high return on the social impact side.
That's Don Chen, president of the billion-dollar Surdna Foundation. Don joined Surdna in 2018 as the board focused the foundation's grant-making on racial and social justice. Before that, he was director of the Ford Foundation's Just Cities and Regions program. Surdna has committed $100 million to impact investing in the form of program and mission-related investments, and staked out innovative approaches early on in the COVID crisis. Let's jump right into our conversation. And welcome, Don.
Thanks, David.
It's great to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and in particular because I've been watching your writings through kind of this crazy year we've had. One of your most recent posts has the provocative title of "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community," which I think comes from Dr. Martin Luther King's 1968 book. So I guess my first question to you is, where do we go from here? Chaos or community?
Well, thank you for asking that. I posted that on MLK Day, and Dr. King's been an inspiration for me ever since I was a little kid. And I often turn to this book because it was one of the last things he wrote. He gave a couple speeches around it, and it was really an encapsulation of a lot of what he was really pressing for at the time, which, as you know, was really for economic justice. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with striking sanitation workers when he was murdered and assassinated. And this book, Where Do We Go From Here, is really, in a lot of ways, it reflects his thinking late in his time on Earth with us. So I decided to pick that theme because I think so many of us these days really regard ourselves at a crossroads. We've seen, some of the worst of what we have here in the United States with the rise of white nationalism and violent movements to try to undermine our democracy. And at the same time, we've seen some of the best. We've seen people mobilizing, really getting involved in the democratic process, registering voters in places like Georgia, the increased participation of Black voters, in particular women of color, has been very inspiring. And so there's been a lot of positive experiences coming out of this last period. And when I wanted to raise that question because I think some people would love to just say, okay, let's go in this direction. Let's build community now. But the point of my essay, my blog post on the Surdna website, was to say, before we move on, we really need to recognize that accountability, truth, some soul searching, frankly, some self-reflection as a people really needs to occur before we can really move on in a way that helps us learn from this latest episode in our history. So that's the lesson that I really take from, the endless series of lessons that I get from Dr. King.
Yeah, a kind of a reckoning and a kind of recommitment in a sense. And just tell me a little bit about how Surdna has sort of navigated, not just the pandemic and the particulars of working, but that, if you like, but also sort of the challenges that have been laid down for us. Whether from the racial justice protests of the summer, and where does Surdna play, and what are you thinking about in terms of where you take it from here?
I'm glad to talk about that. And before I dive into the events of last year, I'll just note some background. The Surdna Foundation was established in 1917, so we're 103 going on 104 years old, and it has really...
Can you unlock the riddle of the name for folks who haven't
Sure.
done their anagrams yet?
Our founder is John E. Andrus. He was a very successful investor and industrialist. He founded a chemical company, pharmaceutical company, was an early investor in Standard Oil, Singer Sewing Machine, and many other investments that really bore fruit, as you can imagine. And he was the mayor of Yonkers, New York, and also congressman from this part of New York. So he established. Oh, and Surdna is Andrus spelled backwards.
That's right. Yeah,
The family lore is that he didn't really want to put his name on things. Although he did end up putting, his family put his name on a number of things, but he seemed to be fairly modest and didn't really want to put his name in lights. And so Surdna is Andrus spelled backwards. And over the decades, the foundation has really evolved since 1917. It always focused on the needs of society's most vulnerable, starting with orphans. Later in the 1950s, it focused on what we would call, very low-income retirees. And then in the 1980s, it established itself as a professionally staffed foundation and chose to be a social change foundation as opposed to a direct service foundation. And then 2008, the board unanimously voted to adopt social justice as its mission. And 10 years later, in 2018, the board decided to put racial justice in the center of our mission because I think we all recognize that to achieve social justice in the U.S., you have to focus on racial justice as well. So that is really what's driving us today.
and that's about when you came in
Mhm.
as the president a few years ago.
Yeah, and so 2018, and then you fast forward just a year and a half or less to the early part of 2020 when the pandemic hit. So just to get to your question, we, along with a lot of other funders, found that we had to respond quickly. We are not a disaster response or an emergency response funder, but we realized that this was a set of challenges that were really unprecedented during our lifetime in the last century. So some of the things that we did are things that a lot of foundations managed to do, and so we did many things collaboratively. One was to really provide a lot more flexibility to both our grantees and our PRI users, giving more flexible terms, basically putting delays on covenants and fees and various things to just cut them some slack. With regard to the grant making side, we decided to create a pot of money which would basically enhance and make bigger some of the grants that we were providing by basically spending our unallocated funds for the next fiscal year. So we decided to kind of speed that up. And then later, as the pandemic wore on, and then it was, all the sense of urgency was compounded by these various protests and uprisings around racial injustice. I went to the board and we talked about increasing our spending, which the Surdna Foundation had never done previously beyond the 5% requirement. And so we had a couple of months of discussion about that, just to figure out what that would entail, what the impacts would be, and also the value proposition. Why is it important for us to spend more at this time, and what could we expect from doing more of that? So we did end up spending about a third. It's about a third more than we currently spend, and that's planned for the next 3 years. And we're in the middle of that right now. The exact amount is going to fluctuate because it depends a little bit on the performance of our endowment. But right now, since our endowment is doing well, we're able to free up a lot more resources to our grantees and make sure they can weather these various storms.
Well, one of the things I wanted to get into with you, because I did see that you are now the co-chair of something called the President's Council, I think on impact investing with Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation. And is kind of a movement, as it were, of some foundations towards impact investing. In your answer, you fell into a little bit of philanthropy sector speak. You talked about PRIs, so folks
Yes,
might
true.
know those are called program-related investments. There's distinctions between program-related investments and MRIs or mission-related investments. All the philanthropy wonks will know what we're talking about. And then you also mentioned the 5% requirement, which is the minimum payout of the, correct me if I'm wrong, assets, the value of the assets in any given year. And as you said, you've gone beyond that, which was one of the things that actually got me interested in this field, was when I started reporting on it way back. I had not known about that 5% requirement, and to me, it just struck me as strange that all this money was sitting in the bank and only 5% was going out. I now understand it's, complicated, as they say, but you have taken a step, back a few years. I think possibly predating your arrival. You correct me, to move some of the endowment into towards mission, in so-called mission direct. What do you call it?
Well, we
Mission.
call the whole thing impact investing,
Yeah.
and it's broken up into mission-related investments and program-related investments. And you're very good to decode the acronyms. I will continue to try to do that during this interview.
um, And so I want to get into, Surdna's work with impact investing, but first, just I want to hear a little bit about your journey, actually, and where, I know you came from Ford, but tell us sort of where you started and why you're passionate about this work.
Sure. I was a grant seeker for many years. Starting in the early 90s, I was going to foundations like Ford and Surdna and many others for grants, working on a variety of issues, mostly on environmental justice, urban policy, affordable housing, transportation reform, and those types of issues. And I came to philanthropy when I was hired by the Ford Foundation in 2008. So, I had no idea what impact investing was. I barely knew anything about investing, period. And I started learning about program-related investments and various other approaches. And that's really where I cut my teeth in terms of just learning about things like housing finance and various other topics.
You picked a good time to learn about housing finance,
Well,
right?
it's
If
also
you
the right
joined up
place
in
to learn.
2008. Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, it was the right place to learn also because the Ford Foundation, close to 50 years prior to that date, had invented or basically come up with the idea and developed this tool that we now know as program related investing, and recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of that. And so at the time, the Ford Foundation really used PRIs as more like patient capital, low cost, patient low cost capital to meet the capital needs of their grantees. And so there are plenty of PRIs made to CDFIs and for housing finance and various other needs. And they're starting to really evolve that. There was recently a much bigger play over at Ford coming out of their endowment as opposed to out of the grant making side. And so that is absolutely fantastic set of approaches and strategies that they've really taken on.
Well, let me again to cut in just so that the listeners can understand. So I think what you're talking about is the billion-dollar carve out from what I think at the time, as I recall writing, it was a 12 to 14 billion-dollar endowment at Ford, and taking
Yes.
$1 billion and moving that into these mission related investments. And they've been working at that now for several years, and it was seen as a little bit of a watershed for foundations to tap, as we said, this bigger endowment side of of capital. I will say, from where we've sat, we've been maybe surprised that the momentum hasn't gone faster since that announcement, because that was supposed to be a sort of starting bell, not the not the whole thing. Um,
Yeah, I think the this question about how we grow the field is one of the key focus areas of the President's Council on Impact Investing. As you know, one of the goals that Surdna has, as well as Ford, is to really not only participate in impact investing activities, but also figure out how to grow the field. Um, and that's a combination of things, including networking and learning, sharing our experiences, modeling the way you can potentially do it with various types of success, and then also just recruiting more folks to be interested and even start investing alongside us. And I hear what you're saying in terms of the progress may seem to be rather slow in some areas, but I also acknowledge that the world's been a little volatile lately, and so I personally think that I've seen a lot of progress in the last few years in terms of the level of interest in impact investing over this period of time, and hopefully that will just increase in the coming years.
So tell us a little bit about Certain. I know that there is this commitment. I know you've made some early investments. I noticed on the that you're were early investor in the Impact America Fund, Keisha Cash's fund, that she's just raised. Tell us a little bit about how you think about deploying that capital against what we were talking about in terms of the strategies and programs of the foundation.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of resources I'll turn the audience to. One is we took this impact investing journey, if you will, very seriously. We had a board of directors and a staff that really didn't know a whole lot about impact investing, and the time period I'm talking about is like the middle of the last decade, around 2014, 2015 or so, and we decided that this is an area that we really wanted to invest some time and attention to and then get to a decision. So we spent about 9 months or so working with our various board members, staff, some external advisors, really going through a framework, like a decision making framework, which ultimately led us to decide to devote $100 million of our endowment to impact investing. It's roughly 10% of our endowment, which is over $1 billion right now. And some of the questions that we went through in this framework were just really basic things, but also questions that a lot of folks, may not, a lot of folks may not know where to begin in terms of impact investing. And so, some of the key questions are, for example, um, what is impact investing? What are the different types of tool? Like, why would you do it? And so that led us to really take a look at our existing endowment. What do we have in it? Like, what do we own? What are in these various funds? Do these various holdings reflect our values? Does it reflect our mission? And if not, then what can we do about it? A really critical step was really taking a landscape view of all of the different potential impact investing tools out there. You can, of course, there's various types of investments like the one you mentioned with Impact America, but there's also shareholder engagement and shareholder activism. Various other, there's the development of standards and norms in terms of really try to better define what impact is in this realm, and various other activities. And so we looked at all of that during this 9 month process, and eventually landed on a few choices at the end of that process. And this was, by the time we were done with it, it was about 2016, 2017. And we published a report on that, which you can find on our website. I think it's called Mapping the Journey to Impact Investing. And it's very much an impact investing 101 document. Um, and the choices that we made were basically to make mission related investments, or MRIs, out of our endowment to the tune of about 82 million. And then make program related investments, or PRIs, out of our endowment to the tune of about 18 million. And the idea there is a couple of things. Number one, most program related investing programs that you see across the philanthropic sector come out of grant budgets. And we decided to put that instead in our endowment, which is unusual. And rather than treat it entirely as low cost patient capital, which tends to be the case, we decided to treat our PRI funds as high risk, high reward funds. And so that's how we use it. And it's led to some really exciting, very interesting investments.
Well, let me stop you on that because that's fascinating. Because one of the things that has come up in the field, as you well know, and in fact, your own program officer, Michaela Davis, called it out, was a question of what the level of risk appetite there is. In the investment side, I think it's also true on the philanthropy side in some cases, right? Of how are you going to find those new ideas that are not, as they say, ready to scale, buttoned up, all risk adjusted and ready for fully commercial investors. It's folks like Surdna that have a different kind of capital that might be able to make a difference in that. So how do you think about risk?
That's a great question, because I think this whole experience has led us to really revisit this question about risk. What do we mean by it? And if you can break it down, like, how can you potentially, de-risk a situation by recognizing what's really important? And one thing that we found was that For example, one thing we decided to do was to entrust our funds with fund managers of color. Uh, as you know, the finance field is you know um, very male dominated. It's also very white dominated. There are very few people of color and women in the field as fund managers, and diversifying that is not only a good thing to do in terms of expanding opportunity, but it also is like recognizing a lot of the talents and the perspectives that are different from what you normally see in the finance field. And so, you may have someone with a completely different lived experience who brings a different perspective that is actually valuable and can generate returns in ways that may not be expected by mainstream investors. And so, we want to tap those different perspectives with this notion that a diversity of viewpoints can really find those hidden gems. And so that's one way to think differently about risk. And also, we really tried to introduce this notion of social value into the risk profile because we're not just investors, right? We also really prioritize social impact. When we think about high risk, high return, we're also thinking about the high return on the social impact side, and so that figures into our calculus as well. And the list goes on, but those are the types of things that we've really tried to interrogate and we've tried to shed just kind of the knee-jerk assumptions that a lot of people have going into the field.
If I can pull it all together, it seems like a lot of these threads are basically around mobilizing additional resources against both the obviously the challenges and the crises, but also the opportunities. And I guess maybe where do you see those opportunities? What would we double down on, or even 10x?
Mhm. Well, that's a great question, especially right now. I think if we put all of our work in perspective, if you look at the philanthropic sector, yes, there are foundations that are very large. They have billion-dollar endowments and so forth. But our money to achieve impact is relatively small. In fact, relatively very small compared to what governments can do. And so, Surdna, like other foundations, we are trying to do what we can with every asset, every resource that we have, including grants, investing, our voices, our public platforms. But one thing that I think will be continue to be especially important for all of us is to really think about how government can really use its resources and then leverage additional investors, additional capital to the challenges that are facing all of us.
That's a hot topic on in Congress, and in terms of very large outlays for stimulus and recovery.
Mhm.
And it really is a kind of extraordinary moment.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you look at the history of impact investing in the United States, there are so many partnerships between private foundations, different levels of government, financial institutions, and the like. And that's for good reason. I think that foundations are in a great position to pilot things, to demonstrate the feasibility of various approaches. During my time prior to joining the Surdna Foundation, I was involved in a lot of affordable housing finance, including the Bay Area Transit-Oriented Affordable Housing Fund, where we had partners with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and various others, and a series of foundations that put money in to basically create a highly leveraged fund to create affordable housing along transit lines. And then other private investors came in after that because we were subordinate to their positions in the so-called capital stack,
And you
and
had de-risked it for them in some level.
de-risked
Yes.
it for them, made it more comfortable for them to be able to come in, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are multiple ways in which I think foundations can play a role in demonstrating things. The federal government, other governments, levels of government can send signals. They can also be very innovative with the capital that they're able to provide, and then attract other investors and other capital to key problems. One thing I'm particularly interested in, based on the early pronouncements coming out of the Biden Harris administration, are these announcements about wanting to invest more in infrastructure, wanting to pivot more to, for example, a green economy with good jobs, and investments that will help us reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Those are potentially really transformative for not only communities where you could potentially see local people getting hired and people of color not only gaining employment, but also entering some of the career ladders that really lead to better and better opportunities, but also, of course, because of the climate impacts, which would be positive, and the economic benefits from that too. So I think that's a potentially a very ripe area for various types of investments and participation from foundations, private investors, government alike.
Indeed, we've taken to calling that around Impact Alpha the reconstruction. And just in a little bit of sort of podcast cross promotion, we've got a new series of podcasts called The Reconstruction, which tries to wrap all of this together in this opportunity of rebuilding, in a sense, from the pandemic, but also longer term from many of the injustices. And to cross promote Surdna a bit, in our first interview with Melissa Bradley, who I know Surdna has worked with, she calls out the work Surdna has done in the pandemic as really exemplary. So we thank you so much, Don, for sharing with us today, and we look forward to staying in touch and watching what you're doing with Surdna. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. You can read more about Don and the work of the Surdna Foundation at impactalpha.com. Big thanks to Don and to our producer, Isaac Silk. I'm David Bank, editor and CEO of Impact Alpha, investment news for a sustainable edge. Till next time.